Welcome back to the Hot Mess Life Coach. We're going live on Instagram too, so give us one moment to let the preview come in. When it does and all the technology connects, we'll go live. It's 9 now, so we'll wait for some people to straggle in as well. Okay, we are live on Instagram and we are live on Restream, so that's wonderful. Okay, so hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Hot Mess Life Coach Season 5, Episode 11. I'm your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, and I'm here with my co-host, Morgan Barbrett, and today we are going to talk about boredom and continue to get into our discussion about emotions. Morgan, do you want to kick us off by sort of telling everybody what we're going to get into today?
Yeah. So, as with all the other emotions that we've been talking about throughout this series, we like to focus on what is like the function or purpose of the emotion. And so, in the case of boredom, its purpose is to signal to us that we have a need for change or we have a need for exploration. So, even though the emotion of boredom itself feels dissatisfying and flat and oftentimes uncomfortable, it also can be like a precursor or a like spark that fuels a desire for us to either find new ways to spend our time or to change something about our life so that we can have an opportunity to find things that are more engaging and meaningful to us.
Yeah, exactly. And boredom, I find for myself, I'll just speak about me. Like sometimes boredom is scary. I feel like it's scary, right? Because
Mhm.
when I'm bored, everything that I've been avoiding with all of my painstakingly crafted avoidance tactics that I've put into my life,
Mhm.
right? When I'm bored, all of the stuff that I've been avoiding is like, here I am. Ah! Like, it's like every arch villain from the comic book repertoire of my
Yeah,
life is just there waiting to pounce when I'm bored.
right.
I become bored, right? So what can I do to whack-a-mole myself away from boredom and keep that little Tasmanian attention span devil rolling around in my mind? That's my knee-jerk way of wanting to approach
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's interesting, and I think that's how it is for most of us, and we may not realize it because when we start to feel that emotion of boredom, where we start to feel things that we don't wanna feel coming up because we're bored, our first instinct is to find entertainment. Our first instinct is to find things that like, to scroll on our phone, to watch TV, to do some sort of thing that just captures our attention enough for us to not have to feel uncomfortable or to feel that boredom. However, a lot of the things that we turn to for amusement, for entertainment, aren't necessarily the things that generate meaning and purpose in our life. And so sometimes, and Brian was talking about this a little bit earlier, uh, by choosing to handle boredom by turning to amusement, what actually happens is you might experience your boredom gap widening. It'll become easier for you to become bored because boredom is calling us to find meaning and purpose. And if we don't find that meaning and purpose, then boredom's going to keep knocking at the door. It's going to keep coming back to you every time that your attention span isn't actively being engaged.
Yeah, exactly. And that you're going to keep trying to escape it. If you keep trying to escape it, right? And then the boredom gap keeps widening. Like it's like you're a cat, like a scared cat, and the floor is lava, right? And it's spreading and it's spreading, and you have less and less floor to be on, right? Because like doom scrolling worked for a while, but now the
Mhm.
boredom gap is widening. So doom scrolling works less well. So now you have to doom scroll while eating pizza, and then you have to doom scroll while eating pizza while hang gliding. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just like it becomes a ridiculous, or you end up in a place of existential dread, because that's what boredom left unaddressed or addressed unskillfully, that's the
Mhm.
extreme that it goes to. It's like I'm so bored that I've lost my meaning, the meaningfulness in my day-to-day, which then breeds well, what is the meaning? Why am I
Mhm.
here? Is there meaning? What's life about? It's too hard, right? Like, and then so boredom had the devil's hand, right? Idle hands, the devil's playground. It's that whole thing, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
no devil in my mind. It's not about the devil, but it's about the temptation
Yeah.
to fill time as a way to escape the gift that's inside of boredom, because boredom is there to say something isn't right, boo boo, something's up.
Mhm.
Like that something in particular is a lack of meaning. That's what it's signaling. Like, so it's like, if we can know specifically the signal, like you talked about it in the opening, like we need purpose, right? Like every emotion is a signal about something, like an alarm bell, and anger is an alarm bell that you're being encroached upon, that your boundary has been crossed, that
Yes.
something is against your value in that moment, right? And boredom is a signal too, but it's a signal of something really specific. It's a signal that you're not deriving useful, pleasurable meaning out of whatever you're doing in life. And so that's not connecting you to some larger purpose, which the human animal needs, that sort of feeling of belonging and connection. And like you said, the mind is like, the mind wants to go escape that immediately. Let me find something to fill it. The problem is the mind is what leads us all around, but the mind's solution to all of these emotional problems is always a knee-jerk solution that works short term. And so then the mind continues to think, ooh, good solution. And it will do that solution over and over and work short term over and over until you've got some big, wide boredom gap or an explosive anger problem or whatever the thing is that you have from continuing to follow the knee-jerk mental advice of doing the short-term solution, right? And so the long-term solution for boredom is it embracing a deep 180 from resistance to embracing the boredom. What is it trying to tell me? Why is it here? What am I not finding meaningful in this moment?
Yeah. So I guess two things that make sense to talk about based on what we've already said. One is, how do we address boredom in a skillful way? Since it
Mhm.
is very easy, knee jerk to address it in a way that is just like, okay, I can remove this feeling as quickly as possible and replace it with entertainment. So, what does it look like to address it skillfully? And then also, something worth acknowledging is that boredom is like becoming more and more common. It's becoming more and more easy to fall into a state of boredom. And why is it more common now than perhaps in earlier stages of like humanity, when people had like smaller tribes and communities that they, were actively engaged in trying to maintain their own survival? Why do we feel more bored now?
Oh, that's it right there, right? That question, while they were actively engaged in their survival, it's like, are you interested in your survival? Does your survival fascinate you? Do you care about it? You know what I mean? Does it
Yeah.
make you curious how to survive, right? So you're not
Mhm.
bored. Like, it's like you have to be engaged in that. And so, of course, now with the creature comforts of modern society, there are more it's a sort of weird paradox here, because there are simultaneously more opportunities to be bored and more opportunities to be entertained. The
Yeah.
issue is that entertainment, it's an answer for boredom, but not an actual solution.
Yeah.
It's a quick fix. And so we
It
think to
doesn't address the
ourselves,
root.
doesn't address the root at all, because it doesn't bring you more meaning. So like another way to kind of skin the cat of the question you were just asking is, like, if you think about the types of tasks that were available to people back in the day to quote unquote escape their boredom, they would have to
Yeah.
escape their current boredom into something that was inherently meaningful, because there wasn't a whole lot of meaningless stuff to do. You know what I mean? You had your
Yeah.
community. Like, it's even meaningful to go play stickball in the street with other people. That's way more meaningful than isolated alone with pixels, right? Like that kind of thing. And
Right.
this is not about demonizing technology. Like, technology has a lot of benefits. It's about becoming aware of the beneficial ways in which we can utilize and take advantage of boredom and respond to it. And then the ways that society kind of pushes upon us to deal with boredom, that they become then habitual and they seem so normal, but they don't work properly. Like, they don't help us function with boredom, because
Right.
we're trying to escape boredom, which is a natural part of our lives. So if you try to escape something that's a natural part of you, then suddenly you're trying to escape yourself. And that's also a misery engine right there. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, part of this equation is that the more we're existing in a capitalist society that is entirely driven by entertainment, the more access to entertainment we have, and the less likely we are to turn to things that are deeply meaningful, meaning and non-consumerist. So connecting with other people in ways that don't involve purchasing new things or entertainment, or
yeah.
just like existing with the people that are inherently wrapped up in your um, happiness and survival.
Yeah, and so in the end, we might feel the mundane sense of boredom slightly less often at first, but what we will end up with is a larger pervasive sense of malaise, a sense
Mhm.
of disconnection, and a wonderment of why are we here? What does it matter? Like, why does it all? So it is important to address it, right? And like, actually, boredom has inherent benefits in it. Like, that's another thing that kept coming up in my reading this week. Like, it promotes the search for novelty, it promotes motivation, it promotes creativity, it can promote mental health, because there's this area, like, the way of being in the brain, the default mode network, it doesn't actually come online fully when we're full on actively engaged in stuff. And the default mode network is a part of the brain that will problem solve in the background. It's like that phenomenon where writers will say, like, oh, I had this idea in the shower, or I had this idea while pulling weeds. It's because they are doing something meaningful with their boredom. And then the mind then, because it's off, it's in its off time, right? Because it's
Mhm.
engaged in something meaningful instead of escaping. And then it presents to you solutions and eureka moments to other problems that are dogging you in your life,
Yeah.
because you've allowed yourself to slow down and get bored and feel into the boredom. So the thing is, like, prior to electronics, boredom was more readily available to us. And so even
Mhm.
though it was more like, even though we think of it as like like, it's good that it was readily available, because since we didn't have meaningless ways to deal with it, we dealt with boredom in the skillful way. And the skillful way has to do with finding an answer to it that derives meaning. And what I noticed when I was looking at the list of benefits, let me go down to them. Okay. The list of benefits of boredom, they are actually don't have to do with boredom. They are actually, these benefits do not come from boredom if you use boredom unskillfully, right? If you approach your boredom with, I'm going to resist it, or I'm going to go to entertainment, then you don't get any of these benefits. So you actually have to approach boredom with the skill of, I'm going to allow it to touch on my self-awareness. I'm going to reflect during this time of being bored. I'm going to contemplate while bored instead of run. And then when you do that, it increases your self-awareness about what you do and don't enjoy. It helps you tap into your imagination and your creativity. It boosts your relationship skills and your ability to connect. It encourages you to rethink about priorities differently and seek out novel experiences and reduce procrastination. But like, none of that comes from boredom. It comes from the self-reflection. But the
Yeah.
self-reflection is a gift that comes from boredom. Like, we don't tend as a species to desire self-reflection automatically, and culture
Yeah.
certainly doesn't honor it,
Encourage it.
promote it, yeah, at all, right? But boredom does. If we understand the signal that boredom is giving us, I don't have meaning, then okay, that's my signal. The answer is why? Why? Right? And it's not
Yeah.
out there. The reason why isn't out there. It's in here.
Well, and the question I think to ask ourselves to kind of promote or get us into starting to explore like what this boredom is signaling for us is what am I missing and what am I looking for?
Oh yeah.
What like when I'm experiencing this emotion of boredom, what am I missing?
Yeah. Oh man, like, what a great way, both of your questions, like, in terms of promoting contemplation while you're bored. Because what's the
Mhm.
normal question we ask when I'm bored? What can I do now? How can I get out of
Yeah,
this? Who can I call?
right.
Right? All those
Yeah.
fear-based things. Say your two questions again. They're so beautiful.
What am I missing and what am I looking for?
Yeah. Oh man.
And you might notice, for some people who are trying these questions for the first time, you might notice a stillness in you when you ask that. You probably won't have an immediate answer because if we have been in the habit of entertaining ourselves when we're feeling bored, then we haven't or also not in the habit of pausing and, like, looking for those answers. But if you sit with it and you ask those questions to your brain and you don't turn to entertainment because of the discomfort of even asking a question that you don't know the answer to, an answer will come.
Yeah. Then that's the trick, to not run, right? Like, we
Yeah.
run from boredom. And my theory as to why, and I talked about it at the beginning, is because self-contemplation and reflection, which are what boredom is trying to promote, and they lead us to insight and awareness, but we don't like the first stage of awareness. Like, it's better to
Mhm.
be for comfort, right? A animal like us who seeks comfort, to sit in autopilot and in our delusion and in our limited way of thinking, even though there's this low level suffering that comes with that, which is why we watch things like this, because we want to understand what's happening, right? So it has this low level suffering, but it also kind of feels okay. It's okay. This is my fear. This is my place, right? And we then can't expand. We can't expand, right? So boredom gives us this ability to look in and say, what's going on in here? And that first look usually feels really shitty because we're like, oh, there's a childhood trauma limiting me here, and there's a false belief limiting me here, and there's a mean boss who did something that now I have a fear reaction because of every time. And for me, it's like I got arrested one time when I had my marijuana dispensary, and whenever cops pull in behind me, I have a full-on PTSD sweat response to it, right? So it's like so that kind of sort of PTSD reaction I have to that is oftentimes the sort of stuff we're up against and in for when we decide to open the door for the first time to self-awareness, because all the monsters come out first. But they're not monsters, they're stuffed animals, but they feel like monsters to us because we've been avoiding them. So we don't know that they're not monsters. And so the first stage of self-awareness feels awful. So it would be natural to run from it. And so that's why our whole society has built up these entertainment edifices, I think, as a collective manifestation of like, I don't want to see what's in there.
Yeah.
You know, but it's coming out on the other side of it with movies like Inside Out and Monsters Inc. and Soul, where now within the stories that we use to try to escape our condition, we are showing ourselves our condition, so there's no escape.
We had some comments here. So Nadir says electronics are still boring and entertainment is also boring. And you're right, because these things, entertainment, electronics, that like we use them as a way to like subdue boredom, but they do ultimately end up creating more boredom for us because it's like Brian said earlier, it's not actually addressing the source or the core of the problem. It's just a Band-Aid.
Yeah, and Nadir, I really like your play on words there. As a writer myself, like I think I see what you're saying with like you bore into it deeply. Like boring is an interesting word, right? Like, and so you are, if you follow that boredom unskillfully, then you're boring a hole into this like dead end of escape, right? But if you approach boredom skillfully, you are boring a hole into insight and self-awareness and into that deep wellspring within you that's the undamageable, undamaged core that we all have, that society has sort of told us is a fiction, but it's real and we have it and we have to get back to it.
Yeah.
Boredom is a doorway back if we let it be.
100%.
So there was one of the things, this was a helpful little thing for me as like to help people if you're going to try to remind yourself when you're bored to avoid that knee-jerk run escape, right? Because we've been doing that for however old you are. That many years is how long you've been running away from boredom. I'm pretty safe to say that that's probably true of like 100% of people watching, but maybe I'm wrong. But here's a little phrase, and it's don't just do something, sit there. And I love that because it's usually don't just sit there, do something, right? But instead, don't just do something, sit there. If you're bored, don't just do something. Sit there. That's the opportunity right there. Sit there, even though it's scary. And like you said something earlier, that when you first sit and ask those contemplative questions, you may not have an answer right away. You may have stillness. And I want to add to that because what happens for me still sometimes now, but a lot in the beginning of my practice with this is actually, it wouldn't even be stillness that would come online first. It would be a total wave of nerves and anxiety. Like how dare you just sit here? How dare you try to contemplate? You have a to-do. You have shit to do. There are stuff piling up, right? Like there's always something, always. And for me, what happens with my brain is the moment I deign to say, I'm going to slow down and have self-care, whatever little part of me it is that manages the to-do list puts it right here. You know, and I can only see out of one eye. I'm trying to meditate. And he's like, you've got all this shit to do. So that is what happens for me. And only when I am able to go, oh, hey, little bugger, you're there and you're fine. And we can do all this later. And I love you anyway. Then maybe if I'm lucky, that stillness comes. And then if I'm luckier still, those answers come, right? So I'm being a little jesty here when I say it's luck because this is a skill and we have to practice, but it will feel that way. It can feel like dumb luck because when the beginning of any practice, you're flailing around like a clumsy moron in the dark, right? And like, that's the same with the beginning of a meditative practice or an introspective practice or anything else.
What that's bringing up for me is that just existing also can be meaningful by itself, like literally not
Mhm.
doing anything. I feel like one of the ways that I've tried to escape boredom in my own life is by having a long to-do list and constantly having things for me to like occupy myself with. And I remember when I was in college, I was like an incredibly busy person, and my partner, now fiance, said to me, "Morgan, why don't you just like go look at a tree sometime?" And at the time, I couldn't I couldn't grasp, like, why he was suggesting for me to do that. Um, but when you can get some stillness and escape that sort of, like, urgency to do, to occupy, that's when you start to actually connect to yourself and experience some of that awareness of just, like, the fact that existing alone is kind of a meaningful thing.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's so right. Like, it's so true. And it's like, it's actually so, it's one of those things that's so obvious that it's almost like, why did you say it? And then when you said it, it's like, thank God you said it to remind us of this obvious thing that we have totally forgotten. You know what I mean? That's the beauty. That's how you know when you've hit on truth, because it just feels like that. It doesn't feel like new information. It feels like something I should have known that I'm remembering.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And that's what that is. That existence is inherently meaningful. And so
Yeah.
when we're bored, we've actually lost touch with the truth. That's another way you could put that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. Mhm.
There's a neuroscientist named Alicia Wolf. She's at Polytechnic, and she says actually that it's critical for brain health to let yourself be bored from time to time. And she doesn't follow that up
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
practice reflecting, practice contemplating, practice. She doesn't even she's like, just be bored. Stop.
Just let it happen.
Yeah,
Let yourself experience boredom.
exactly. Yeah. So even
Yeah.
the skills we're teaching, we're suggesting about ways to skillfully go into it, even those could, if your mind is tricky like mine, then even those could become an avoidance practice. You could
Yeah.
be avoiding, but fooling yourself into thinking you're introspecting. So be even keeping aware of that, right? Like if you're introspecting in one area that feels comfortable to avoid the feeling in the other area, then you're
Mhm.
just doom scrolling in your mind instead of doom scrolling on the internet. So keep that in mind, right?
Yeah.
This is tricky
Yeah.
business getting into our minds. The Bible says it in this way that I don't think this language is a little bit harsh, but I understand what it's
Mhm.
pointing at. And it says the mind is desperately wicked and deceitfully sick or something like that. And like, it's okay. It's awful. That's awful. Wait, right. But like, but it's true in the sense that the mind wants what it's best for the mind. The mind doesn't have really a full understanding of like,
Yeah.
there's a body out there and a transcendent self out there and a part of me that senses or intuits. The mind doesn't give a crap about any of that. The mind is like, I'm a
Yeah.
brain with an amygdala and I need my armor around me and thought, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't want to feel into that sort of other
Yeah.
way of being.
Yeah, it doesn't have a sense of your mind doesn't have a sense of purpose.
Exactly. It's a tool.
Yeah.
That's
It's
all it
it's
is.
literally like this functioning, like, piece of machinery that is, like, only aware of itself for the most part and trying to, like you said, protect itself from feeling any negative emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, which is like that's a beautiful thing and that serves a purpose, right? Like in a moment, like if I'm in a
Yeah.
crisis and that part of me will keep me from being flooded with emotions so I can serve. Fine.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, if I just continue to not feel them because that would have been hard, then
Yeah.
it sticks with me and it stays with me. Animals have this too. They'll have this same response that allows them to disassociate so they can serve, right? They will
Yeah.
run from the lion. They will protect their gazelle. They will do everything they can. But then when
Mhm.
it's over, whether there was victory or defeat, either way, when it's over, they process what they're feeling by shaking it off. They
Yeah.
that kind of thing, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm doing it because we can do that too. Like we're so discouraged from that, like in our lives, and like that shaking it off is what allows them to just continue existing and being and not needing this escape all the time.
Yeah. Got another thought here. Nadir says, the mind is a problem solver, so sometimes it can make up problems just so it can solve it."
That's
Which I
so
think is true. That's very true.
yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, think about Mark Twain said something like, 90% of everything you've ever worried about never happened, or 90% of
Oh
your
yeah.
problems are imaginary, something like that. I'm
Yeah.
inarticulately,
Right,
but
right.
that's exactly right. That's the truth. Like the mind, but that's the thing. So the mind is, that's the function of the mind. It's like the heart's function is beating. That's what it does.
Mm.
We don't want to stop it from beating. All we have to do is master the art of ignoring it so we can go
Yeah.
about functioning in our lives. And that's the same with the
Yeah.
mind. Like the mind is going to try to solve problems. It's going to create thought streams out of words. That's its job. Our job is to let it do that in the background and not be so fused with it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Easier
and
said.
I guess the emotion of fear is kind of similar, which I guess is partially the driver for a lot of the mind's activity is like your brain paired with fear is going to be like, ah, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. And then our job is to acknowledge that, but not let that panic drive all of our choices about how we choose to live our life.
Yeah, in fact, I would even say if we can catch it at the level of mind,
Mhm.
we can distance ourselves from just the word salad, seeing it only
Mhm.
as word salad, and it doesn't
Yes.
actually have to induce panic. Like
Yeah.
that's
It can
aspirational.
induce self-awareness.
Exactly. It's like, oh, look at, those are the thoughts I'm having. You know, one of the tools from ACT training is like, so one of the thoughts is like, this is all going to go horribly wrong. Just for
Mhm.
example, whatever
Yeah.
your thing is that you're endeavoring to do, and here's that thought creeping up. This is going to go horribly wrong, or I'm not going to be able to manage this, or I can't do this, whatever.
Yeah.
One of the ACT tricks is just simply saying, I'm having the thought that everything's going to go horribly wrong. So it
Mhm.
takes it from everything's going to go horribly wrong to, oh, I'm having the thought that everything's going to go horribly wrong. Huh.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. I don't know if
I
it's
love that
true.
visual. I've never seen somebody, like, visualize it.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
mean that can be really helpful too. And there's a third layer of that. You can, if you do this out loud, if you notice you're fused with the thought, the third layer is you can go, I notice I'm having the thought that. So it goes from like here to here to here each time you do
Mhm.
it. And so, and actually what happens with me when I do this exercise, and I'll do this fairly often because it works so well, is it makes me feel, it doesn't make me feel silly like in a shameful way.
Mhm.
It imbues me with a silliness that then takes the power and seriousness away from whatever terrible thought I was fused with before and am now
Yeah.
diffused from.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when we do that with boredom, you go from just feeling dissatisfied to, "Oh, I have a choice about how I choose to spend my time and what things I want to, like, invest my attention in."
Yeah, exactly. And not only does that help with dissatisfaction, but it will help with the fear that comes on the heels of boredom sometimes. Like for me, right? And like I'm sure that's a phenomenon for others. Like it's too
Mhm.
much time in boredom, and if I'm not really ready to go inside, that brings up fear, right? And the thoughts that are fused with the fear, if you can diffuse from those, then you can manage your fear, and then you can. That's the beginnings of approaching boredom more skillfully, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have one quick story. Did I say only to you prior, or did I mention this in the live stream about the yogi and his thing about
That was
sending?
prior, so share
Okay,
that.
so I'm reading a book called The Art of Joyful Living, and this yogi, he talks about what to do with boredom. He says the mind, if it's not interested in something, it creates misery when you try to do stuff where there's no real interest. So his thing was like, if you're in a board meeting, just send love to the people in the board meeting and like spend your time
Board
that way.
meeting,
And yeah, the
BORED.
boring board meeting, exactly. So I tried this the other day. I was stuck in it was a mandatory thing I had to do. I don't want to get too specific because if anyone from that watches, I don't want them to know how bored to tears I was in this mandatory thing. But I was bored to tears in this mandatory thing, like, ugh. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna try the thing with the yogi. And like, there's two sort of ways to deal with it, right? You can tune into your senses, or you can tune out to your imagination. Like, and so tuning into your senses would be like in the board meeting, instead of focusing on the content of what you don't care about, you're like, oh, I'm feeling frustration, I'm feeling anger, my elbows hot, my shoulders tense. You just stay with that the whole time, and like you practice that as a form of introspection. The other one is
Yeah.
the imaginary one, where you, instead of being with your senses, you go out, still ignoring the content of the meeting altogether, and instead you look at the people one by one, and you send them love, you send them energy, you hope for their highest good. Like, and you can employ what you know about each person, like, oh, Dave struggles with impatience, so Janice talks too much, like whatever your judgments are, right? You reverse them and send them as love, like change them up. So you're practicing moving from that place of non-judgment to the place of love as a skillful way to use your boredom rather than seething with misery in the board meeting. How did it go for me? Medium well. So I did okay. You know what I mean? Like the last 15 minutes of the board meeting, I scratched near rage. But for the first 30 minutes, I was fine. I was loving people, sending them energy, doing the progressive muscle relaxation. It just went on 15 minutes beyond my skill level at that moment. So
Oh,
but
I love it. I love it. And that's oh, I just love it. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, and this is what I wanted to say, is that both of those things that you mentioned, both of those skills that you're practicing as a way of like skillfully handling boredom also have meaning to them inherently.
Exactly.
So you're creating awareness for yourself. You're building skills for your life that are going to contribute to less boredom in the future, which serve a purpose inherently. So rather than me sitting in this BORED meeting and not giving a absolute crap about anything that anybody's saying and feeling all this like resistance and frustration that are like building up to my we call it allostatic load, my level of stress that I then can't process later. I don't have to build up my stress. I can focus on building my own skills and satisfaction with my life just by changing the way that my mind is handling this boring meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Or any boring thing. Nadir again commented that waiting in line for groceries comes to mind, which is so true. Like, I mean, I actually don't mind grocery shopping, but standing in line.
I always read all the things around me when I'm standing in line. I'm just like, oh, like what are the other things here? Not like looking for something else to buy. I mean, if I'm being totally honest and transparent, usually the line is through like the cookie aisle, and I'm looking at all these cookies and I'm thinking about how all that sugar would impact my body. But it's instead of me just being like, I can't stand sitting here, I'm usually just like reading.
Yeah, trying to drop resistance if you can. So we can end there. We'll just embrace your boredom if you can. If you're bored, it's okay. You can just sit there and be bored. That's really beneficial. Or you can try love training. Try love training or try sense training or try to just chill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate it. We're going to be back next week with the finale of our conversation on emotions, where we're going to bring this all together, talk a little bit more broadly how to deal with your emotions and what all that's about. So thank you, everyone, for being here with us. And we'll see you next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.